Thank you, Shay, for the introduction. Warren is with me here on the other line. Thank you for coming in, Warren, to join us today.
Well, thanks for having me, Gilbert.
Yes, and maybe just quickly give us a quick background about you for some of the audience who may have not heard about you before.
Okay, my background quickly is I started working on Bay Street in Toronto in 1986, so I've been around for 37 years. I've also a little bit of my background is I've got a Bachelor of Mathematics from the University of Waterloo. I'm also an MBA from University of Western Ontario. I also have a CFA, and I've worked in the finance business pretty much ever since. Over the past 25 years, I've had my own hedge fund. Rosseau LP has been my largest hedge fund, and it's so I've been running that by myself for the last 25 years. Our focus has been in mining. We've made the vast majority of our profits in mining, although I do get involved in oil and gas occasionally and some other areas like technology. But the vast majority of our investments are in mining.
Great to hear. So let's start off because our main topic of discussion is uranium and nuclear energy investing. So maybe we can just talk about that from your history point of view. So when do you start sort of delving in and investing in uranium space, and tell us like a winner story. Tell us to begin with that.
Sure. The one thing I could bring to the table here, Gilbert, for some of your listeners here is I've been involved in the uranium space for a fair number of years from the investment side. I got involved initially probably in about 2006, around the time of the last big bull market where, uranium hit probably a high of around, I think it was $138 per pound. And I was involved in a number of juniors then. I was also involved in extract uranium, which we sold to the Husab project to the Chinese. That was one in Namibia. I was also involved in a few other plays, and some which I lost money on, some which I made a little bit of money on. But I was a witness to what happened in the last cycle and the amount of hype that happened in it. You're probably aware that there was upwards to 400 to 600 new juniors created in the space. Virtually all of them went to zero. And so it was good times. And at the end of the day, there was a lot of bad times in the uranium space. Following the Fukushima accident, I got involved in NextGen's big discovery in northern Saskatchewan, and that brought me back to the uranium space. So I've been in the uranium space pretty actively for the past, of course, since 2006. So how many years is that? That's quite a number of years. And more recently, the last 7 years, I've been reasonably intensively involved in it, mostly through my investments in NextGen. And NextGen has been a multi-billion-dollar win. We were the largest shareholder in NextGen. We owned over 10% of the company. We got in around 60 cents, and then over the last few years, I've been gradually letting a little bit go over time. But I'm an active watcher of the uranium space, and I'm very pro-nuclear. I believe nuclear is the future for baseload energy.
Okay. Yeah, you mentioned about the last cycle. So what part of this cycle that we're happening in terms of the uranium? Because we all know the metals and minerals itself is all cyclical business too. So
Yeah.
What kind of part of the cycle are we in right now?
It's difficult to say. I'm one thing I'm pretty sure of is that we won't see a repeat of what we saw last time. Last time was very unusual, and I think anybody who witnessed it has learned a lot from that, and won't let it happen again. There's a lot of destruction in the last cycle. Where we are today is we've seen the turn in acceptance of nuclear power. We're starting to get quite a number of very sophisticated people finally figuring out that the only way we're going to power our future as humans on this planet, certainly over the next many decades, would be nuclear power until we find a better source. We can't continue to burn thermal coal and pollute the atmosphere. And so there's been a resurgence here in nuclear power, and people are getting much more accepting of it. And there's some new technologies, the small modular reactors. So we're at the stage now where we're, for the first time in a very long time, nuclear is starting to gain acceptance, and there seems to be a bit of a wave there on the on building out nuclear reactors. We haven't seen any big build out in North America yet, but certainly China is ahead of the curve, and they're building probably about, my understanding is about 50 new reactors, and they've got many, many more on the drawing boards for possible future construction.
You mentioned about China. I personally, of course, a lot of Chinese friends and investors. When I'm talking to them, one of the main, I would say, concern or thoughts they have, they maybe say investing in the uranium or nuclear space is the safety issue. So maybe you can touch upon it, is how safe are we in terms of that nuclear plants compared to the past? Are we getting better? And are we, maybe you can, share some light on that topic.
Yeah. Well, Gilbert, one of the biggest travesties I've seen in the world in my lifetime has been the anti-nuclear movement of the 1970s. What that did, and Greenpeace was one of the groups right at the forefront of that. It turned the world off nuclear energy for about the last half century. So for the last half century, instead of having clean nuclear energy, we've been burning thermal coal, right, to generate power as a significant form of power. So that unfortunately has put us behind almost half a century in terms of research and development on nuclear power. But there have been a few diehards that have continued to do research throughout this period of time. And the ones I applaud the most are the people with the small modular reactors. You're probably hearing a lot more about that these days. The good thing about modular reactors is the biggest cost when you're producing electricity from a nuclear power plant is the capital cost. The fuel cost is in the single-digit percentages, so less than 10% of the cost is actually the fuel itself. The biggest cost is running the big plant. So with small modular reactors, and you'll notice there have been one permitted in Canada and one in the US, that allows standardization of number of nuclear power plant parts. And that will go a long way to reducing the capital costs and things like that. The other good thing too with nuclear power plants recently are some of the new fail-safe designs out there. I'm familiar with some of them. One of them is a molten salt reactor, where basically the fuel is already in liquid form, so there can't be a meltdown. So the important thing is, as we learned from Fukushima, is these new designs. If the ones I like the most are the ones which if electricity is shut off to them, the reactor stops rather than accelerates out of control, like we saw with Fukushima when they had their power cut off. And obviously, the new designs, any Western design, is better than what happened with the Chernobyl incident. But I think I share your concern about safety, and I'm looking forward to seeing more of these fail-safe small modular reactors getting implemented, and us learning a lot from them and making them as safe as possible. But there is a technology out there to make a very safe nuclear power plant.
So what do you think the end game, ultimately end game for nuclear energy? So what kind of role will it play in terms of whole energy spectrum? Because we have the traditional and energy source, the fossil fuels and oil and other natural gas, and then we have the electricity, of course, now is a big thing, and other clean energy sources too available to us, or technology is still developing. So what do you think nuclear energy play, and how important of a role will it be ultimately?
Well, I think the key role it plays is in baseload power, because right now, as you know, with wind and solar, if it's at nighttime and there's no wind, we get no power, right? So we need a solid form of baseload power that'll power our factories 24/7 and have power available for us. And we haven't really reached the point yet where we have the battery technologies that could effectively and cheaply store the energy created through wind and solar and use it at another time. So our basis for any industrial country really right now has to be nuclear. We've dammed up pretty much all the major rivers around the world. And of course, the other option is thermal coal, which we're trying to get away from. But nuclear energy is basically, as far as the future goes, the only source for basically baseload. That'll be the key going forward. It'll be a baseload energy producer. It'll power the car factories and all the big factories and power the cities night and day, 24/7 at reasonably low cost and safely.
within the nuclear energy space, will there be other materials that can displace uranium? People talk about thorium for a long time.
Yeah.
So is thorium a potential replacement?
In time, yes. I've been following fusion reactors. Those are slightly different. Most nuclear reactors are fission reactors, which break apart atoms, and fusions are reverse, right? So thorium is involved in the fusion reactor. So that technology, I've heard, I think 10 years ago, I had a scientist, I watched their video, and they basically said, well, within 2 years we'll have this nailed down, but it's still very much in an early stage, and it's not ready to displace, traditional nuclear power quite yet. But it's one of the possible future energy sources. In some ways, people think it is. There are some benefits to it. So that's, I would think, decades away. But there's a lot of people working on it, and I wish them all the best.
Let's talk a bit more about the investing side of the uranium space. And you've probably followed various parts of the world, how the different resources and production exploration activities. So we in Saskatchewan, of course, we got a lot of high grade stuff here. So what do you think? Which part of the world geographically places that people should follow, or emerging places with uranium production or exploration potential?
Yeah, the most important thing about uranium is it still has a little bit of a stigma from previous generations, right? And you saw that recently with Berkeley not getting their permits in Spain. They found, my recollection is, anyways, I won't recall. I'm not that certain about the amount of pounds they found, but they had a significant discovery of uranium in Spain. They wanted to put it in production, and they were denied the ability to do that. Also, Australia has been kind of interesting. They have some of the biggest uranium reserves in the world, yet Australia still has very convoluted and confusing laws with respect to uranium mining. Also, one of the largest undeveloped uranium deposits in the world is located in Sweden, and they have yet to allow for uranium mining. Again, they outlawed it some years ago. They haven't reversed that ruling yet. I anticipate they will, but they haven't. But Sweden is embracing nuclear power, so I anticipate that to fix over time. And in Australia, hopefully they'll get their things together. So I anticipate, over time, more and more countries will allow and open their borders up for uranium mining. It's being done safely in Canada. It's been done here for generations safely. So there's no reason it couldn't be done safely in Sweden and in Australia. And there's also other countries like Brazil, which is, banning uranium mining. They have lots of uranium too. So around the world, what I anticipate seeing on the supply side is gradually areas will open up. So as an investor, what you want to do is, as these areas open up, be a first mover, go in there, look at some of the assets in there and seeing whether they could be economic and can make some money. So that would be an area. But right now, the key jurisdictions I would look at would be Canada, Namibia, and Niger. And I personally would not be investing in Kazakhstan just due to the whole Russian issue. But as a Westerner, I think what's going to happen over time is the sourcing of uranium will be increasingly strategic, and the West will buy from Western sources, and the East will buy from Eastern sources. For instance, I anticipate a lot of the Kazakhstan production going into China, and I expect a lot of the Saskatchewan production going into the US, Japan, and other Western countries. So,
and we talk about some of the uranium investing sentiments. Earlier discussion with Nick Hodge earlier, and touch upon that. So why is it always hot and cold in terms of the sentiment itself? So either uranium stocks go ballistic, everything go skyrockets, very hyped, and then suddenly it gets really cold. So why is that happening all the time?
Yeah, well, it hasn't happened really since 2007. But right now, or maybe not exactly now, I think it's come off a little bit. But let's say, 4 or 5 months ago, the amount of hype in the uranium cycle was almost intolerable, and it was pretty outrageous. And everybody was hoping to see the previous cycle repeat itself, where you had companies like Paladin going from 2 cents to $8 a share, right? Of course, when the last uranium cycle ended, it went right back down to 2 cents, and we saw 400 to 600 uranium juniors blow themselves up. But a lot of investors were believing the hype and wanted to get super excited. They're saying, well, if the last peak in price was $138 per pound, you inflation adjust that, and you're approaching $200 a pound. We're going to see $200 a pound. We're going to make a fortune. This is our time to create generational wealth. And people were getting really, really excited about all of that. And I think it was overdone. And as you know, I was trying to caution people on that for quite some time now, and I've taken a substantial amount of abuse. So despite being, again, positive on uranium, positive on the nuclear business, apparently I wasn't jacked enough on the price of uranium that a lot of the investors were, because there were a lot of investors who were sold a bill of goods that, hey, look what happened last cycle. You go from $2 to $8, you'll make enough money to set yourself up for life in one trade in the uranium space. Well, it hasn't happened yet. People have been waiting probably the last 3 years. They've been expecting this. It still hasn't happened. And, anyway, so it hasn't happened. And what I try and do is just share with people what I know about the uranium business. Like when I got involved in NextGen 7 years ago, I anticipated a strong move in uranium, which, really haven't seen. And, there's the old argument, right? It is like, if you're looking at the price of uranium, there's a supply issue and there's a demand issue, right? So on the demand side, there's an install base of around 450 reactors globally. The only country in the world building nuclear reactors to any great degree is China. Let's say they've got 50 under construction, that's 10 a year. So you're adding 10 nuclear reactors to a base of 450 every year, which is very low single-digit growth, right? So then people are all getting hyped up about, Japan restarts, which haven't happened as fast as a lot of people had hoped. Japan also has massive amounts of inventory, so they're not going to jump out in a panic to buy a whole bunch of uranium. So on the supply side, it's almost impossible to grow supply. On the demand side, it's almost impossible to grow demand fast enough, because what you have happening is, of the 450, the average life, the average age of a nuclear reactor, I think globally, is around 30 years. In the US, is around 40 years. So some of them are much older, obviously, to bring that average up that high. So some of them are being decommissioned gradually. Some of them are having their lives extended, but generally the number is going down gradually, and it's being replaced by the Chinese and a few other countries building reactors. But you just frankly cannot build reactors fast enough to get significant growth in demand. And then on the supply side, so it's really a supply side story. And the big thing about supply is there's the demand of about 180 million pounds of uranium, and supply of around 130. So there's always been about a 50 million pound deficit for the past many, many years. In fact, certainly in the last 7 that I've been following, there's been about a 50 million pound a year deficit. So if you look at, so basically we are consuming more uranium than we're producing. So that's probably the base of many of the bullish cases. But the issue has been, nobody seems to want to ask, well, where is this 7 years supply of 50 million pounds a year coming from? So that's 350 million pounds. In addition to that, an additional about 80 million pounds have been taken off the market by the various ETFs like, SPUT and, Yellow Cake, things like that. So that's well over 400 million pounds of uranium has just magically appeared on the market from secondary sources. So the real trick here is secondary sources. So I don't have a good handle on secondary sources, and I don't think really anybody does, but whatever happens, it seems like every single year for the past 7 years, I've been, on this story really really hard, there always seems to appear into the market to satisfy all demand. So what's interesting now, though, is we're starting to see the price of uranium remain extraordinarily stable here around $50 a pound, which is fascinating. So we'll see if that's a bottom in here, and we'll gradually move up over time. But it's really a supply-driven market here, and looking in the future, there's some big supply coming on board. Like NextGen's will be producing roughly 30 million pounds a year, which is pretty substantial for one mine. So, and there's some other mines coming on producing 1s and 2s and 3 million pounds a year. So those are gradually coming online too over time. So, and then you've got this whole mystery source that seems to be feeding the market, and so that's sort of the real essence of the story. Is nobody could really claim they know where all this excess supply seems to be coming from to meet the deficit in the market. And the bulls are saying, well, someday it's going to end, and when it ends, we're going to have a big supply deficit, and the price is going to shoot up. So that's the super bull case. My view is we have tons of uranium out there. Like, as far as I see uranium projects around the world, I see lots and lots of projects which really don't need too much of an increase in prices to get people excited about them, get them into production. They'll take probably 3 to 4 years to get into production, and any deficit will start to be made up pretty darn quickly. So
how about you? You personally, what companies are you investing right now in the uranium space, or at least following?
Yeah, well, my view on the commodity generally is it's going to improve over time. How fast or slow it does it, I cannot really predict that. So I'm optimistic on it. I don't think it'll go much below 50, but I could be wrong on that. So what I'm looking at for now is I'm looking at some of the juniors operating some of the best basins of the world. Specifically, my number one favorite is Saskatchewan. And I'm watching some of the juniors there as they acquire ground, as they start drilling and looking for the next big discovery there. And secondary, I'm looking at Africa, Niger, and Namibia, and possibly Australia in time, as if they start making it more favorable to invest in uranium exploration in Australia. So that's really what I'm looking at. And when you look at how value has been created and how people have made money in uranium in the last, let's say, 7 or 8 years, the biggest money maker, without a doubt, from what I've seen, is NextGen. It's gone from being worth a few $100 million to multiple billions, and I was the largest shareholder in that. So in theory, I don't know of anybody off the top of my head who's made more money than I have in uranium, and that's the way I did it, which was I focused on the best uranium company, hoping for a price rise, but not expecting it. So if the price of uranium does go up, that's awesome. That really helps the story. But basically, I look for the best possible uranium company I could find, and that was NextGen, and it turned out to be a raging success, and there was significant value actually created. It didn't run up and collapse like all the stocks did last cycle. So as far as anybody investing in the uranium space, you should really look at company fundamentals. Do not buy uranium stocks expecting the price to explode upwards. If that happens, that's awesome. But look for good, solid uranium companies that are going to make some money and do great things under the current price environment.
Warren, so we're running out of time. It's indeed a great pleasure talking to you about the uranium experience, investing, and all your insights in that market, indeed.
Well, thanks for having me, Gilbert, and I hope your listeners appreciate at least some of the insights I've got, and they can go out there and roll up their sleeves and find some tremendous uranium companies to invest in.
Great, indeed. Thank you for your time, and we'll talk again next time.
All right. Thank you very much, Gilbert. Take care.
Yeah.